Good evening, everyone, and thank you for really joining this truly amazing panel put together by the National Alliances for the Advancement of Haitian Professionals with support from Chacarella. And truly, I think this is an opportune time for this discussion. My name is Allx Cantave, and I'm a program officer with the Kellogg Foundation. And really, the issue of racial equity is deeply embedded in our core DNA. And it is truly a privilege to have with us this evening truly four amazing public servants. And it is truly a privilege to moderate this conversation with you all. And I will go really introducing each one of you, but I'm not going to go into your entire bio. Folks can actually read the bios with the documents that the organizations share. But this again, I want to let you know what an honor this is to have you with us. We will also going to be joined later by Attorney General Rachael Rollins of Suffolk County of Massachusetts. But let me begin by really introducing the amazing Honorable Dotie Joseph, Florida State Representative of District 108 of Florida. I'm not going to go into your entire bio, but amazing. Representative Joseph was born in Haiti, studied at Yale University, and also law degree from Georgetown University. Welcome and thank you for agreeing to participate with us in this amazing panel. Next, we have Attorney General from DC, District of Columbia, Racine. And again, Karl, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for the amazing work you're doing in the District of Columbia. You know that it's not easy for the work that you guys are doing, particularly where you are located, all that's going on in the country. And thank you really for all that you are doing and have done. Just like Representative Joseph, Attorney Racine was born in Haiti and studied at University of Pennsylvania and University of Virginia. Welcome and thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
We have with us Attorney General Kwame Raoul, who's sworn as the 42nd Attorney General of Illinois in January 2019. The Attorney General Kwame Raoul was born in Chicago of Haitian parents. And really, I remember when you were first named to the legislature, taking President Obama's seat in the Chicago legislature as a state senator. So once again, thank you so much. I think all two of you have been amazing public servant. And as we talked about the program, please feel free to also talk a little bit about yourself, your own trajectory. As we're studying this, and we just been joined by Attorney General Rachael Rollins. Again, thank you so much for joining us. So you're apparently, you are my Attorney General, by the way, being a resident of Boston. Attorney General Rowling is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the Suffolk County of Massachusetts, which include Boston, Massachusetts, Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. Welcome, and again, thank you so much for really for being part of this truly amazing and very timely panel. We all are deeply aware of what's been happening in the country, particularly in the past few months, not just in terms of with COVID, with Black Lives Matters, what's been happening in terms of the relationship between the police and communities of color. I know that you don't have a whole lot of time. We're going to go right into it, and really thanking the National Association for the Advancement of Haitian, National Alliance, sorry, for the Advancement of Haitian Professional for truly putting this amazing panel together, and for all of you for agreeing to be part of this really timely and amazing panel. I'm going to begin by asking each one of you, all of you, to respond to this one question with regard to the Black Lives Matter movement. And the reason I think this is so critical, we do see what's happening in law enforcement, in criminal justice, almost as the legacy of slavery, right? The way in which law enforcement was set up, the relationship between law enforcement and criminal justice and people of color, how white supremacy is embedded in our institutions, in this continuing struggle, right, of communities of color to address issues of racial disparity, racial inequalities as they relate and impact our communities. And I will begin by asking you, where do you place the Black Lives Matter movement in that struggle for social and racial justice in the United States? And I will begin, Representative Dotie, if that's okay with you, I'll begin with you. Where do you place the Black Lives Matter movement in that struggle for racial equity and justice, particularly with regard to law enforcement and criminal justice?
Sure. I mean, in the larger context, it's part of the larger struggle for equality and justice. In a subgroup of that, it's part of the struggle for Black liberation. And that's not something that our people are foreign to, considering that our country was literally born out of a successful slave revolt, right? So this is a continuation of affirming that Black lives actually matter, that we are actually equal, and that we should be entitled to the same deference and rights that everybody else are. So whether we're talking about how we move through the criminal justice system, if we even have to have an encounter with the criminal justice system. So this happens at every stage, whether we're talking about who the police chooses to engage with, right? There's the issue of racial profiling that impacts all Black people throughout the African diaspora, regardless of where you're from. The difference is your ancestors got here maybe a different way than mine have to the New World. So the question is, how do we fit in that larger context? We stand at the intersection of both race and immigrant status, right? So all of those things collide so that we understand what that means. And why do I bring immigration into it? In the context of what we're seeing right now with the immigrant detention facilities, and even with recent court rulings, we're right front and center in all of that. And then you tie in the criminal justice system, which has nothing, which is a separate path than the immigration penal system, but just the regular criminal justice system for civilians. Then you have a situation where our encounters highlight the disparities that exist based on racial lines as well as immigrant status.
Thank you so much, Representative Joseph. Attorney General Kwame Raoul, what's your take on that? Not only in terms of this question, where does the Black Lives Matter movement fit in the struggle for racial equity and equality, but also on what Representative Joseph shared?
Well, because I can't read lips and I couldn't hear Dotie, I can't opine on what she shared. There's some technical. I can hear you, but I couldn't hear her. But okay. So I'll just opine on the Black Lives Matter movement and where it fits in the struggle for criminal justice reform and law enforcement reform. A struggle that predated the Black Lives Matter movement, but I think what the Black Lives Matter movement did is really inject a new generation, the powerful voices of a new generation into the debate on criminal justice reform and law enforcement reform. in ways that force us to rethink things and to rethink our approach. You know, when I came into the legislature, I wanted to achieve everything. I spent 14 years in the Illinois legislature. I wanted to achieve things in terms of criminal justice reform and law enforcement reform all right away. And I realized that I would fail with that approach. And so I accepted incremental change, but almost to a fault, where you start taking too little of a bite out of the effort to change things, and it doesn't force people to realize that you can't just check a box on a particular reform or a couple of reforms after a life is lost and you say you've responded to it, or on criminal justice reform, that there's a systemic problem that dates back to the origins of policing and the origins of sentencing and prisons and so forth. And so when there are otherwise what some people perceive to be radical taglines to some of these things, such as abolish the police, abolish prisons, defund the police, because those taglines are somewhat dangerous to keeping everybody in the conversation, it gets in the way of folks embracing what's behind them, which is reimagining it and understanding that from its origins, it was problematic. And so the racial inequities embedded within are systemic, and it's not just a matter of tinkering with, but it needs dramatic change. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement has lent its voice to that.
Thank you so much, AJ Raoul. AJ Rollins, turn over to you. And thank you for joining us as well this evening.
For sure. So I echo what both of these brilliant people have said. What I think Black Lives Matter has done really well is just when I hear the Attorney General talking about, for example, incremental change to a fault, they aren't letting up. They have exposed hypocrisies, right? There are certain things that you don't get to say, I'm sorry for, right? Nobody wants to hear, to George Floyd's family doesn't want to hear, we apologize for Officer Derek Chauvin. There shouldn't have been an Officer Derek Chauvin in the first place, right? He had multiple infractions, upwards of 17 infractions, and did this with such callous indifference and actual sort of entitlement, with a hand in his pocket as he squeezed the life out of this man. What I think Black Lives Matter exposes is, you know, we tried to do this quietly. When Colin Kaepernick took a knee several years ago, nobody wanted to listen and people lost their ever-loving minds. But if you had two knees to choose, there's an amazing article in the Washington Post about several months ago that said, two knees, you have to choose one, Colin Kaepernick's or Derek Chauvin's, and you can't make any other choice but that. Which one, now looking, would you have chosen, right? So I believe, you know, I am a district attorney. I am a newly elected district attorney. I am a progressive person, but Attorney General, I agree with you. I don't let up, because the second you let up, the system snaps back to the status quo as to what it was. Systems are set up to operate the way they were set up, and the criminal justice system isn't broken. It is operating the exact way it was set up to function. So what we need is exceptional people like you making laws, we need activists, we need exceptional criminal defense attorneys, but then we need Attorney General Racine, and we need district attorneys around the country that are going inside to say, with their autonomy, and today this starts internally here. So I think what Black Lives Matter has done is met a moment, right? They've been around well before this, but they seized this moment. And I think they've done a very good job, even though people think the language might be explosive. You know what else is explosive? Murder. You know what else is explosive? Lynching. right? And I've seen several of them. And Ahmaud Arbery, you know what else is explosive? The Breonna Taylor situation, where we still don't have any arrests as a result of that, right? Elijah McClain. Like, we have just seen death after death, and our community is suffering from vicarious trauma. Black Lives Matter has captured all of that in the moment and done an exceptional job spreading it across the globe. So I would put them up there with any other entity that has worked on civil rights in our country thus far.
Thank you so much, A.D. Rollins. Appreciate that. Turn over to you, A.D. Racine. You know, the system is functioning the way it was designed to function, right? That's what we heard from your colleagues. Where do you put Black Lives Matter in that? You know, it's incremental, but it exposes that the system is working the way it was designed to work.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate with these fabulous public servants, each of whom are my dear and close friends for whom I have tremendous respect. Each of them I know are bold leaders and understand that their time on the mantle of leadership isn't promised and that they're going to use every single minute of the day to have an impact on fairness and justice. I think Black Lives Matter has done an extraordinary job, and I rely on the authority of our former great Congressman John Lewis, who, you know, really reveled in the movement of Black Lives Matter and the enthusiasm and passion that it has evoked from all manner of people. It's a multiracial movement, multi-ethnic, multi-geographic. It knows no boundaries, not even in the United States. And what it seeks is a true accounting and reconciliation around fairness for people of color. And while, of course, it is focused on criminal justice issues, I think it's captivated the moment to call on us to focus on broader issues of inequity. And Ms. Joseph mentioned immigration, and that certainly falls within this broad Black Lives Matter agenda and movement. And I'm very grateful for the leaders who have sacrificed so much. Ms. Rollins, D.A. Rollins references Colin Kaepernick. This is a person who's given up his professional career, okay, in order to advocate for what's right. And what did he earn? The scorn of the President of the United States and indeed corporate America, who blackballed him and blacklisted him from all manner of opportunities because he dared to hold America accountable to its principles and values. And so the Black Lives Movement Matter for me is one that calls for honest reckoning and legislative change, electoral change. I note that the people that you have on this panel are all elected. And we as elected officials have to bring about the change that we can bring about in order to make our society more just.
Thank you so much, A.D. Racine. This is truly, truly fantastic. We're going to come back to you, A.D. Rollins, and ask you, you know, how do you create that equitable system that we all care and talk about? And particularly, you know, how do you create that equitable system, right, in terms of the criminal justice, law enforcement, but also I would also look at the issue of prison reform, right? I know in the state of Massachusetts, CORI, right, the criminal offenders record information, a barrier to education, to employment, to basically, you know, we have a system that's disenfranchising our communities, right? Turn it over to you, A.D. Rollins. How do we create that equitable system that we're all striving for. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement is really earning and asking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because since taking office, I'm part of the problem, right? Like I chose to become a district attorney, and it is really important that I have to keep myself in check, right? Because I'll give you an example of what progressive district attorneys do. We run on a platform. We're very honest. We're earnest. We're truthful. I have the daughter of immigrants. My dad is second generation Irish American. My mom is first generation from Barbados. So I am very honored to be here with you, beautiful Haitian, wonderful people. I'm from Barbados, though. But to let you know that, I look at the system and I recognize that there are things put in place where we are not kind of meant to win, right? So for example, when I was talking about my parents' background and why I was here, I try to explain things in words to my staff that they understand. You can be a dictator when you get elected, or you can try to culture change and shift. The problem with culture changing and shifting is it takes more time. But what is exciting about me getting in as the DA is some of us get in and we really try to hold ourselves accountable. Others get in and we try to make our footprint even bigger. And that was the problem in the first place. People don't want a, more over policing and over prosecuting. They do want the police overwhelmingly in a lot of Black communities. They just want the police to do the things they're supposed to, like solve the violent crimes and stop the harm that is happening. What we're seeing in inequities, for example, is a police department that will knock on a door to arrest somebody for a trespass without knowing that in that same house, there's an unsolved homicide. And that community, when our communities of color, I would defy you in certain neighborhoods, certainly in Boston, I'm assuming in Illinois and in DC and in Florida, that you can't go 5 houses without finding a family in certain communities and poor communities of all colors that has not been impacted by the system. So what I like to do is give real examples of things to my staff, not just hypotheticals of racial discrimination. But today, for example, we had 2 Supreme Court opinions from our state Supreme Court where a Black man was driving a car less than a quarter of a mile from where I am right now in my neighborhood. He didn't commit any motor vehicle violation or road infraction, and they just ran his plate like they do. And they found that the car was not registered to him, but a woman. And then when they pulled him over and started questioning him, they found that his license was suspended and some other things had happened and some more significant things. But nonetheless, somebody challenged the running of the plate, right? The fact that there is a discriminatory intent there. Our Supreme Judicial Court has found that a Black man running away from the police when they say, hey, can I talk to you, is not an indicator of crime, right? Or is not something that they can calculate regarding, probable cause or when they are going to make the official stop or when the arrest occurs, because the indignity of being targeted based exclusively on your skin. I'm not talking about me walking around with myself with a weapon and maybe not having a license. I'm just talking about Karl walking down the street and the gang unit driving by and seeing it. So I do this by policy memos, training all the time, giving real examples, and then very candidly, I show up. Today at my job, I have 14 different job locations of different courts and places where we operate. I show up, and not as undercover boss with an afro wig and like buck teeth on. I show up as me and I sit there, and it's not to get people in trouble, but I want to see what happens in our courts. And it is really interesting that you can wait 2 hours, right, for a judge. But if you're 3 minutes late, you'll get a warrant. But a judge isn't on the bench sometimes 3, 4, 5 hours. The system is completely broken. We bring people back all the time just because we can, with no intent of making them better, or in fact saying, and if you are working, we need just a document of your pay slip, and you don't have to be present for that next court date, or just have their lawyer say, I spoke to them or something happened. We have to adapt better. So I think we need to show up, we need to have policies and procedures, and then we need to make sure that we're training in it, because wishes and dreams don't happen, right? Like we are, Karl and I have 350 employees. Karl has way more than that than I do. And, when I sit in my office, all people ever tell me is, yep, we did that. Nope, it's great. It's working. And if I just keep sitting there and listening to the yes people around me, I'm completely disassociated with reality. So we have to leave our towers and go down and see what is actually happening and make sure that the things that we are demanding are occurring.
Thank you so much, A.D. Rollins. Turning to you, A.G. Raoul, the system is broken, right? Protests everywhere, requesting, seeking, and demanding justice, equity. We're also seeing that there's a lot of young people in the Black Lives Matter movement. What kind of leadership that is required in the movement to bring about real change, real and sustained change?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people who sort of juxtapose or compare the Black Lives Matter movement or the youth activist movement of today to the civil rights movement of the 60s. And if you think about Black Lives Matter, it's both a rallying cry that all sorts of people can use, right? As well as it's an organization. And sometimes that gets confused. And some people who want to criticize will say anything that negative that happens in the context of a protest or any statement made by any individual who's confronted with a mic at a protest is attributable to Black Lives Matter. And so that becomes a dangerous thing, who is the leader. But I think it's very intentional that Black Lives Matter takes approach that while there is a global organization and while there are local chapters to Black Lives Matter, that they're very intentional that they don't try to isolate on a single leader. I always would hate when somebody would ask me who is going to be the next Martin Luther King, who's going to be the next. In the context of Chicago, our first Black mayor was Harold Washington. And we get so focused on that individual and not on the details of a movement that sometimes isolating on a single leader is a dangerous thing. But at the same time, it's important to have focus. And I did grab off the Black Lives Matter Chicago website some of their specific demands that I could refer to. And the interesting thing is that, if you were to compare this to Black Lives Matter in another municipality, there are some things that will be similar in a different municipality, but there's some things in here that are very Chicago specific. And that is the beauty of not isolating on a single leader. You could really create something. You can have the local architects of your movement to right size it to your municipality. So there's like close the Homan Square Center. Homan Square is something, a specific location in Chicago where the police were taking people, the common layperson didn't even know Homan Square existed. And they were interrogating them in coercive ways. And people didn't even know where their sons or their daughters or their fathers were when they reported to the police station and they were in Homan Square. There's references to torture that had occurred in the city of Chicago by the hands of the police department. And so there are various things in there. as well as I'm in charge of implementing adversely to the city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, a consent decree that grew out of Loretta Lynch's patterns and practice investigation. However, I'm not at the table. I'm not a litigant in the suit by myself. There are community organizations, Black Lives Matter included, who are at the table. So there's specific activity that they're engaged in at the local level that may not be happening in other jurisdictions, that allows this sort of, I won't call it leaderless, because there are leaders, there are powerful leaders in Black Lives Matter, but one that doesn't just surrender to, well, we have to do it the old-fashioned way where there's just one leader. This approach allows them to, at a local level, address the local problems.
Thank you so much, A.G. Raoul. Turn over to you, Rep. Joseph. Please make sure that we're all hearing Rep. Joseph, because I think we heard you before, except for A.G. Raoul. Let's make sure that we all can hear each other. Focus on the movement, right? Focus on the movement, not on individual leaders. So what role, Rep. Joseph, do you see a legislator is playing in addressing those issue disparities, right? To support, whether to support, to accompany the movement. What role do you see a legislator, and again, particularly immigrant legislator of color, is playing and really addressing disparities and inequities in the criminal justice system?
So the role of the legislator would start with identifying the infirmities in the system, and to fix those structural barriers that get you to equal treatment under the law, right? So that would be everything from exploring various weak points in the system at every stage. What are the bottlenecks? What are the things that cause us to be more or less represented in comparison to our representation in the population? Whether we're talking about at the arrest stage, at the conviction stage, at the sentencing stage, what do those disparities look like? Researching best practices, but also better practices. Just because it's the best practice doesn't mean it's the best practice. That might be the standard then, but we might need to take it a step further in terms of training, implicit bias, cultural competence, all of that. Proposing solutions to those identified infirmities in the form of legislation, right? And once you have that legislation or the document, advocating for and gaining support for those tangible improvements. So beyond just the basic mechanics of filing and advocating for legislation, I think it's important for us who come from these various communities to not only be the voice for our communities, but get our communities engaged in that civic process. What does that look like? So that can look like taking the extra step of engaging the community at different points for advocacy, or even in the development of that legislation. So centering the people who are closest to the pain, as Representative Ayanna Pressley said, so that they can be closer to those solutions. So an example of something I did like that, I organized not too long ago a roundtable on Black Lives Matter and getting solutions to the issues that have been raised, right? And as part of that, I convened over 40 entities, mostly some of the young people who were behind the protests that we had locally here in Miami-Dade and Broward County, as well as law enforcement. So we had people from Black Lives Matter, people from Dream Defenders, people from, every end of the spectrum, from the NAACP, the ACLU, as well as various agencies. And I was super encouraged by the solutions that people brought to the table, or some ideas that needed to be flushed out, where we were able to collectively identify some real things that we can do to bring change in the system by just getting people to the table and putting our heads together. Now that's over and above, right? Like that's not traditionally how our legislation is always formed, but I think it's a good way that as we enter that space, whether it's as a Black person, as an immigrant, as a woman, whatever it is, whatever element of diversity is that you bring to the table, that you also recognize that it's not just you, but you're bringing the voice of others to the table as well that might not otherwise have a seat at the table.
Thank you so much, Web Joseph. Turning over to you, A.G. Racine, bringing people to the table, equal treatment, right? Really advocating. So we hear all of this. How do you think it's possible? And how do we improve relationship between law enforcement and communities of color in the Black community?
Okay, that's a big question there. And before I get to that question, I do want to say that I think that in some way, I'm going to go out on a limb. The four of us elected officials are beneficiaries of the Black Lives Movement, energy, as well as the points of concerns that they've highlighted. For example, I know that when DA Rollins ran, she ran on an agenda that she was not going to sit quietly and watch how cash bail was being utilized to punish poor, mostly Black and brown criminal defendants. She said she was going to make a change on that. You better believe that that movement and the energy behind it, certainly propelled her to go ahead and make those kinds of changes. When DA Rollins said that she was simply not going to prosecute 15 types of offenses that were heretofore always prosecuted in Suffolk County because they discriminated against Black, brown, and poor people, and that those 15 offenses were nonviolent offenses. That's because folks had pointed out that this was outrageously unfair, racist, and biased. In DC, we got rid of the chokehold because of BLM and their advocacy. We got body-worn cameras because of BLM and others and their advocacy. Now we're mandatorily publicizing body-worn cameras after an officer-involved shooting within 5 days because of the advocates. And so the advocates, when they're focused and they're specific, they not only can help elect people like us, but they can also help us drive the kind of legislative and policy change that will bring greater fairness and security to the communities in which we work. As to your question with regard to the police, I think the police have to, to do a lot of work to go back and regain the trust in the community. And I remember growing up at a time in DC where, the person I looked up to the most, other than my mom and my father, was Officer Friendly in the school. And I know that I spent the majority of my time outside of school when I wasn't at home at the police boys club leagues. Okay? That was a different level of interaction and engagement with the community that, sadly, speaking for my jurisdiction in DC, we no longer have police boys club leagues. They've been defunded. And so that role of the police being engaged and being a part of the community, has been stripped away. And so I think what the police have to do is to come back to the community, establish trust the good old-fashioned way, earning it every day. And then I think you'll see greater cooperation from the community with the police.
Thank you so much.
If I could jump in, this is like words of wisdom that Karl is speaking right now. And I think what we see, real life examples are, there's usually residency requirements. So for example, to be the DA of Suffolk County, you need to be three things: alive, a lawyer and a resident of Suffolk County on the day you get sworn in. I was two of those things, and then you have to win, of course, your election, right? But police officers, if you're a veteran, some of the residency requirements are, eliminated. After a certain amount of time, you no longer need to live within the community. And I think that I like to remind people, and I don't know what in each of your jurisdictions the overwhelmingly white section of the community is, but in Massachusetts, like, a Wellesley or a Waban or a Weston, it's RW towns that are like super uppity. If they woke up and every one of their police officers were Black and their children were being FIO'd and stopped and frisked on their way to school, they would immediately have the governor, the mayor, the chief of police and everyone on the phone, and they'd be heard immediately about those things. For whatever reason in our communities, that doesn't happen. There's a sense of entitlement by law enforcement to the job as opposed to the community, right? Not entitlement to the community, but understanding how important that trust, that mutual trust is in us working together. And what I like to really explain is racist police officers like Derek Chauvin make my job harder, right? Because that is the officer that the media is pointing out in every single circumstance. The media, I like to remind people, Black and brown people, Black men in particular, suffer from the same problem that many white police officers suffer from, which is really ironic. We only ever see frequently white police officers shooting a Black man in the back. We rarely see the good things that police do, and we all know that there are good things. And we rarely see positive images of Black men and brown men or families and cultural things. I like to say if we had a jazz fest in Roxbury, there might be one media person here. If we shot somebody in Roxbury, every single media news outlet would be present and would be running that story. So I think, when we have racist officers that kill, DAs that willfully look the other way and don't prosecute, that results in less guilty verdicts for homicides, right? Because those are the officers I put on the stand to say, community, believe this person. They're saying this is what happened. And if every interaction you've had has been tainted or cancerous, then it's nearly impossible for you to think that they are telling the truth. And remember, guys, that's not just our trial juries, that's our grand juries as well. We aren't getting true bills in front of our grand juries of 23 people when all they see are these officers that are engaging in criminal behavior and it's sometimes even murder.
Thank you so much.
If I could weigh in on that as well, Alex, because I think what Karl and the district attorney raised are really, really important points. I hired onto my security detail, and I counted amongst Chicago police officers, many of them as my personal friends, people I've played basketball with, people I've known, and I can see them that way because I have the personal relationships with them. But the communities that they police don't necessarily see them in that manner because of the way they interact, because of the way some of their colleagues may interact with the community. And so that means to me that law enforcement departments have to proactively do things to make up for some of the damage done in terms of the community police relationship. One of the gentlemen I hired had started in the Inglewood neighborhood of Chicago, one of our more challenging neighborhoods, a baseball program for youth. Now, to his credit, the new superintendent has asked him for guidance for bringing a district-wide police athletic league, so the police can interact with youth in a different manner than they have historically. And just the dealing with a way I spoke to the superintendent and I said, we deal with crime victim services through our attorney general's office. This is when you go in after somebody's lost a loved one to murder or they've been raped, and you come with resources to help them out. I said, you guys could be engaged in introducing those individuals to our office, and those individuals can see you in a different way. You're not just coming in with guns blazing or with a baton, but you're coming in to help. And that those are just a couple of ways that you can change the relationship. But then you have to make the reforms comprehensively.
Thank you, Kwame. Turn over to you, Rep. Joseph. Huge disparities in terms of criminal justice, law enforcement. Then we have COVID. How are those disparities exacerbate the impact of the pandemic, particularly in communities of color?
Wow. So
you see what we've seen out whether it's in Massachusetts, in New York. Our communities disproportionately impacted by this.
So if we're honest with ourselves, even before the pandemic hit, we were overrepresented in a whole host of things, whether we're talking about receiving disparate and worse care in the American health system, right? And, unpackaging a little bit why that is, some of that is rooted in the historical realities of how Black people were treated in that system, right? There's systemic issues. For example, the very practice of gynecology was founded on the mutilation of and torture of Black women and not recognizing their pain. Right? That, like, let's talk about that. Or when we do go, our pain is not evaluated in the same way. And, that concept of, that concept of bias permeates every facet of society. We also reckon overrepresented in some of the economic factors impacting our ability to keep up with preventative, curative, and rehabilitative care, right? Don't get me started in our overrepresentation in underlying health conditions like diabetes, heart disease, asthma, all of which are have very historical roots and cultural things that exacerbate and perpetuate some of those issues. Now, why? Let's talk about why. Because there were policies that were either deliberately discriminatory on their face or failed to address the discriminatory impact, which may or may not have been intentional, of certain systems and structures. What do I mean? So some of the deliberately discriminatory policies include things like redlining, right? Which rob Black communities of their ability to earn generational wealth through home ownership. But also what it does is it concentrates poverty in certain areas, which leads to a whole host of other issues like, school systems that, because of that segregated system, that's why we had cases like Brown versus Board to assert that we wanted equal schools. And ever since we've had the passage of Brown versus Board, we've seen the perpetual insistence, implicit or explicit, to try to resegregate our kids, or at least not fund the school systems equally, whether it's through a robbing of the public school system, traditional public school system, or charter schools. Now that dynamic is different in various communities. Sometimes, which one is better for the Black community is in reverse, depending on where you are in the country, what policies are in place to ensure that accountability is taken into account. So those are complicated issues. But then let's talk about other things like the difference in how crack cocaine, that epidemic, was handled versus the much more compassionate and care-focused response we see in dealing with the opioid epidemic, right? So with one, it was much more punitive, and even how, which forms of crack were punished and how they were punished, crack, the rock versus the powder. And that was indicative of who, white versus Black, rich versus poor, tended to have one versus the other. And who gets arrested for marijuana related infractions, even though, by the statistics, we use them, not me, but people use them at about the same rate, right? So what you have is a population or populations, whether you're talking about the Black community, Hispanic community, Native American communities, that were already super susceptible to health and wealth disparities because of the economic, environmental, and historical, collective and current individual trauma. You know, many of these people were barely holding on to begin with. Then you add on top of that the impact of the coronavirus, and what you get is a veritable recipe for disaster. And this is what we're seeing the fallout of.
Thank you so much, Rev. Joseph. We're going to ask one last question to you, AG Racine, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for some question. You know, inequities, right? Racial disparities endemic in all of our institutions. That's what we're hearing. It's impacting basically all sectors of our lives, right? Education, criminal justice, law enforcement, health, housing, employment. How do we dismantle those factors, right? The racism that are embedded in our institution to actually create, right, the kind of the equal treatment that we talked about? What can we do to dismantle all these inequities that are endemic in almost all of our institutions?
Sure. Well, first, I don't think I'm going to be able to give you the A answer in less than 7 hours. So I'll take the B answer in about 2 minutes. Look, all of those grave inequities stem from the direct line of slavery, racial brutality, racial discrimination, and white supremacy. That's why the average wealth of a Black family is about 10 times less that of a white family. That's why the health disparities that Representative Joseph described so well, are so prominent. That's why the disparities that we have in education are also so prominent. And we know that notwithstanding high levels of education and economic success for people of color, the fact is that they are not earning equal pay for equal pedigree nor equal work. And so we, in many ways, have been needing a new movement, one that will go far beyond the successful movements of the past that sought to eliminate legal discrimination. But we know that notwithstanding the great laws and the progress that we've had, where the gap has remained is in understanding the real impacts of our racial system here in the United States, the caste system. Now I think we have an opportunity to have a reconciliation around these very impacts. And I'm incredibly excited to be in a position to advocate and advance for change, certainly in the criminal justice system, but also around education and economics in a way that we hope will provide for more of an equal playing field. Right now, it's not even close, right? 10 times the difference in wealth. Black family, Black brown family, white family. That's outrageous. It's untenable. And it's not being fair to Americans.
And remember, right now in the global pandemic, with education, as the representative pointed out, many of our families are English language learners, right? And so many of our families, whether justified or not, are put on an IEP. I don't know what you call them there, but some sort of an assistance program regarding learning disabilities or perceived learning disabilities, right? And the gap is widening with respect to our education, not just that our schools are segregated, which is already happening, but in this global pandemic, we are seeing that with schools, continuing to push out the date that people are actually going to be attending in person, many of our family members are first responders, right? They're the people that are keeping us alive right now. Not just necessarily, we always knew it was police and fire and EMS workers, but now we know it's also sanitation, hospital workers, food distribution workers, and people who work in supermarkets, primary caretakers. Those are the ones that don't get to Zoom into meetings. They have to physically show up. They're putting themselves at risk. They're also at higher rates of eviction and foreclosure. So it is a perfect storm. And then when COVID-19 happens and you look at comorbidity factors, when we have all these underlying health issues based on, racist, situations or people not taking our pain seriously, which the representative, eloquently pointed out, we are failing in virtually every circumstance. So bringing it back to what we were saying earlier, that's why I don't even flinch now when I demand excellence from our government, right, which I am now a part of. And I try to run my office as if we are a Fortune 100 company, because that's what the community deserves. And it is incredibly hard as government. When you have a monopoly on something, there's no incentive to get better. You're not afraid another government is going to show up and take over your government, right? Or, when people work at the registry of motor vehicles and wait for 8 hours in line, and somebody says, well, where else are you going to get your license? I'm going on break. I don't want to be that government. I want to be the government that is serving the community, that my office is not only seen when somebody dies or commits a crime. We want to be in the community, giving our money back to the community. We want to be an economic engine, in that it's only 350 jobs, only 160 of those, you have to be a lawyer. So I have admins, I have victim witness advocates, I have investigators. I say to people, are you nosy? Yes. You could be an investigator. Do you care about people? Yes. You could be a victim witness advocate, right? And we have to look at ourselves and say, do you need a college degree with that? Maybe we could say college degree or associate's degree preferred, but life experience matters as well. And look, if you're a member of the military, some of my security detail attorney general is a Marine Corps veteran who served this country multiple times, graduated from high school, enrolled in the Marines. He is more qualified than many people I know with a Ph.D. to not only do his job, but as far as leadership skills, not to mention if we have I'm a single mom of my daughter, and I have my two nieces that I'm the guardian of. Those life skills are transferable. We have to look at all of the barriers to entry that we have and what can we do ourselves. Because what I try to do is not just point and say, why aren't you hiring people with Corys? Well, I'm going to hire people with Corys. Now, maybe they won't be the chief of my gang unit or my homicide unit, but I can certainly hire them to be involved in community engagement. I can hire them in tons of different, Karl, I know you have sort of a street worker program that you do in DC. They don't want somebody like me who's like, I read a book about you once. They want somebody to say, I served 10 years. And I got out, and look at me. I have a job now. I have turned my life around. I have done this. They want people with a lived experience that actually understand their pain points. So I think, that is where I will end.
Great. Thank you so much. I know that.
Can I say one last thing here? I think, again, just the comments are rich. The movement, and the movement will continue, is also about, as we've discussed, identifying potential legislative changes. It's also about voting people into office and voting people out of office who do not embrace, all of humanity. I love, for example, that the Attorney General from Illinois answered a question posed to him rapidly when they asked, have you ever had a police officer pull a gun on you? AG Raoul said, yeah, I was 17. Right? I like having an attorney general who understands the issues from looking at the barrel.
Thank you so much. Let's turn it over now. Let's open up for questions. What can we do as constituents, to be more productive during this election year?
So
happy to jump in there, depending on where you are. I'll be really quick. Find out, number one, who's on the ballot in your state, and obviously find out how to vote in the national elections. If your state is not a battleground, then go volunteer to make phone calls or otherwise provide assistance in battleground states. My girlfriend the other day spent hours of her Saturday in Washington, D.C., calling Ohio voters. And I was riveted during those conversations. But there's every reason to get engaged and involved. And please find a way to be active, even in states that you may not reside in. If you live in Florida, you know that election is going to come down to 0.5% or 1%. We've got hundreds of thousands of Haitian Americans in Florida. This is the time for us to come out and vote and not be duped by the misinformation of the Trump campaign.
I'll hop in real quick because I have to hop off. That number one, just make sure that everybody that you can think of is registered to vote. We have a short window right now. And I, you know, in my world, everybody's registered to vote, but that's not true. So, and sometimes people don't understand the importance of it. Think about any issue that you care about. Black Lives Matter, you know, police reform, anything, any issue that you're passionate about, the environment, whatever it is, it's tied directly to elections. Mm-hmm. Who is in charge matters. I filed a bill in the legislature for equal pay for equal work for women. Seems like a no-brainer, but guess what? In the state where I reside, that's not a priority. That's something that for them, it's not a thing. So that's regardless of political party, but the leadership, it makes a difference. So I'm telling you guys, like whatever it is, make sure that you're registered. There's a website. If you're not sure if you're registered or you want to send it to your friends, it's iwillvote.com. That's it. You can pick whatever state you are. It gives you the next steps information. Beyond making sure that you're registering to vote, make sure that you have a plan for election day. Or not just election day. I encourage you to vote early. Sure, request your vote by mail ballot, but with all the foolishness they're doing with the mail, go to early voting, cast your vote, make sure you get counted. I'm telling you guys, this election will be the most consequential election of our entire lifetimes. As a Black person, as a person who's an immigrant, if you're watching the Supreme Court decisions that are coming down, whether you're talking about how we're going to handle Black Lives Matter, is that going to be something that is actually meaningful, or is that going to be discarded as some kind of like left-wing something or other, right? And I'm not advocating for a particular person right now in this forum. If you want to know what I'm advocating for, holla at me on IG, you know, Dotie Joseph, Dotie Joseph, you know, and I'm happy to answer questions if you're not sure how to engage, who to volunteer for, and contribute to candidates that care about the issues that you care about. Like, we need to do that work for ourselves. So whether that's volunteering, contributing to campaigns, and if you're not sure, I'm in a battleground state. If you want to get involved with making some phone calls, holla at me, because I'm here for all of that. So thank you. You guys have a great night.
No, before you go, we have Joseph and also both AG Raoul, you're going to have to hop up as well. Any last word on the issues that we've been discussing before you jump off? AG Raoul, we'll go with you first, and then we will turn to you, Web Joseph, before you hop up. And I know. Okay, why don't we go with you? What's your
okay. All right. So my parting words are just tune out the noise. in this election, we're going to have a lot of forces, mostly outside influences, trying to convince you that your vote doesn't matter and it doesn't count. They're going to try to convince you that this candidate cares about that when all their actions have told you the opposite. And I want you to just tune out the noise, pay attention to actions, and vote accordingly. Our vote matters. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't invest so much in making sure they couldn't vote. They wouldn't go and destroy our mail system. They wouldn't do all the things that are leading to voter suppression. Listen, your vote matters. And if you don't want to vote for any other reason, do it because I asked you. Just do it because of me, okay? Be like Dotie said, and I asked her, and I'm promised, like, do it for me. Do it for John Lewis. Do it for the people who fought and died for us to have the right to vote. This year marks the 100-year anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Before, when this country was fighting, women couldn't vote, Black people couldn't vote, white men without property couldn't vote. Yo, like, this is for real. It matters. So please, please, please vote like your life depends on it, because it does.
Yeah.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
so happy to meet you. I'm gonna find you. I'm gonna find you.
I could finally hear you because I had a
I
technical
know, it's
difficulty.
amazing. So we always get people again, right? And this is so amazing. Thank you so much. Stay safe. And Raoul, we turn over to you because I know you have to go as well.
Yeah.
What's your last?
So I see a question about police unions on there, and I'm going to weave that into my response to the previous question about dismantling the remnants of legacy of slavery in our institutions. And I'm going to steal a line from the Broadway musical Hamilton, and it's about being in the room where it happens. I became the Attorney General of Illinois last year, and 3 times a week, there was a process so that 3 times a week that we had a senior staff meeting. And guess what? I was the only face of color in that senior staff meeting that occurred 3 times a week that directed the policies and approaches of the Attorney General's office. That room has changed. That room has changed in short time dramatically. I became part of a family of attorneys general, and we have an unprecedented number of African American attorney generals led by Dean Karl Racine. And he and our future vice president were pioneers amongst the attorneys general. Now we have, I think, 7 African American attorneys general. And being in the room and forcing a dialogue that would not happen. We meet collectively as attorneys general of all of the states and territories. And being in the room, we force a conversation that would not happen if we were not in the room. That goes for the police unions as well. You get this dramatically conservative leadership of many of the police unions. And yet I hear from talking to a lot of my friends, personal friends who are police officers or who are retired police, that many of the Black police officers aren't even in the room. They're not even participating in the elections or the conversations. And so the police unions are representing positions that are inconsistent with what they individually would advocate for. But they are at least there. I've heard a lot of dialogue that has discouraged people, Black people, from becoming police officers. We can't get so anti-law enforcement that we discourage those who would change the system. So many systems have to be changed from within. And I think it was the district attorney who said that, once she was elected, she became I don't want to put the exact words, it became part of the problem, right? Yeah. People start pointing at you. But if you're not willing to take that on, we're going to fall short of changing things unless we get in the room that happens. And my final point on police unions, I've gotten together a lot of leaders of law enforcement departments within the state of Illinois, and we're trying to move towards police licensing within the state of Illinois. so that there's a consequence from a statewide level, because we know that there are obstacles that come about from collective bargaining of disciplinary processes at the departmental level that stand in the way of real reform and real accountability happening. I think it was the district attorney who talked about the former officer Chauvin had many previous misconduct events. In Chicago, Jason Van Dyke, who murdered Laquan McDonald, who had many previous misconduct. And until we have a system, if it doesn't happen at the departmental level because of collective bargaining disciplinary process, we've got to do it at the state level. We as attorneys, all of us as attorneys, can have our licenses taken away if we engage in conduct unbecoming of a lawyer. I think those that have a license to carry deadly force and use it in the name of the state should have the same.
100%. And what I will say is many of these police unions are active and retired police officers. So these sort of outdated, tough on crime, Brady violation riddled 80-year-olds now and 70-year-olds that are retired from the force but are Archie Bunker, make Archie Bunker look like Martin Luther King, right? Are essentially making a lot of those decisions with respect to some of the police unions. To your other point about Black and brown police officers, we have MAMLEO, the Mass Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers, that is often at loggerheads with our Boston Police Patrolmen's Association. And, we have police officers that are making, I don't know if you read the article in Germany, they found all of these police officers that were deeply involved in Nazi, behavior. That how is that different with respect to, we see our police officers that are sharing, footage of Black men being killed or using racial slurs when they're working in neighborhoods that are overwhelmingly Black and brown. And to your point, Attorney General, I'm a lawyer. I don't have the lethal and legal right to kill, right? With no oversight. There's not a hotline you get to call first to say, can I keep going? Should I do this? No. And there are certain things that I'm sorry or oops doesn't work any longer, right? It shouldn't have worked in the first place. It absolutely doesn't work any longer. And I will say, not just to batter law enforcement, DAs have failed the system enormously as well. When we look at an Ahmaud Arbery and we look at the fact that 3 different DAs watched that video that all of us have seen of the lynching of that man, of the hunting down of that man and lynching him. And I would say a police proxy, because now we know that that's a retired member of that police department, the father, McMichael, as well as he had worked for decades in the DA's office. And so 3 DA's offices watched that video and said, looks fine. Georgia has a citizen's arrest statute. I'm good. That breaks down faith in the system. And when we have a system where peaceful protests and taking a knee does nothing, but when we break a window or destroy a building, you would fight harder for a building that insurance will rebuild than you will for a body that is never coming back, for a human life who was ripped away and stolen, right? You have more, rage and attitude about property crimes when people have reached their tipping point and quite frankly are saying, but you don't listen to us when we act and we're not waiting any longer. You basically are telling us after George Floyd is murdered that we have to expect that same police department to do an investigation, the same one that hired Derek Chauvin and kept him on after 17 different infractions, and the DA's office that never prosecuted him or did anything about it. We have to wait for that system that's failed us to now bring us some sort of accountability or justice. I'm telling you, the police unions are now getting a taste of what is about to come, because there are many people, not only our legislature, but our mayors that are standing up and our city councils that are standing up and saying, we want police review boards. We want civilian oversight boards. We want subpoena power to be able to look at that. We want licensure, Attorney General in Massachusetts. In order to do your hair you have to be licensed. In order to be an electrician, you have to be licensed. And you can't kill somebody. You can give them a horrible perm or like curly bangs or something terrible. You can't take their life, and they are required to be licensed and have to re-up that license and get training all the time.
One last thing, and
Please go ahead.
I'm going to go. And this is, everybody doesn't have to agree with this, but I think there's a dangerous paradigm that's being created. It's coming from the president, but it's coming from other pundits as well, that forces us to discuss things in sort of a false dichotomy that, when people say, well, we have to do something about police reform, there comes a reply about, what about black on black crime? Or alternatively, when one complains about the looting or violence towards a police officer, one says, well, what about police brutality? We can, and I think we have a responsibility, all three of us, to be against all of it. And we don't have to choose, and we don't have to be forced to have the discussion about one against the other. I absolutely will prosecute somebody that will commit a violent act against a police officer. I will absolutely prosecute somebody that loots or destroys property. But I will also demand reform and prosecute, if I have authority to, a law enforcement officer that exceeds his authority, commits murder or commits a battery. And I can be against all of it, and it's consistent to me. And with that, I've got to leave.
Very good to meet you, Attorney General.
You as well.
See you, Kwame.
Good seeing you again. And
I mean, just to piggyback on that, yeah, we just had a press conference where we, essentially stated that we in no way we wanted to vocally support and ask for the well wishes and speedy recovery of the two deputy sheriffs in LA that were, almost executed, right? Shot in the head multiple times. That is absolutely unacceptable, criminal, and will and should be prosecuted. And we can stand up and say that that type of brutality and violence is unacceptable, and will be, they will be held accountable to the highest extent of the law, while also, as the Attorney General said, standing up and saying, and we want to make sure police reform continues to happen, right? We can't just point at these one-off situations and say, see, it's back to what I talked about with systems. Systems always snap back to what they were doing. And the police love regulating themselves, because who wouldn't, right? I mean, who wouldn't be able to say, hold on a minute, no, I got this, nobody else look, I'm all good, right? Or regulating their own. Right now, I just got notification of 24 Boston police officers that were all allowed to retire or resign prior to any charges being brought. Now, it was, many of them were before I was the DA, but, I don't get to just move out of Boston or say I won't come back to Target any longer if I steal $3,000 worth of stuff out of Target. Your job shouldn't allow you to be free of prosecution or be more inclined to be prosecuted, nor should your skin color or your zip code or something like that.
Okay, we have our last question on the board. How do we unite the community toward a common goal? Also, how do we truly support each other?
I'll jump in on that. I think it's incredibly important to, when you're working with the community, to actually be informed by the community as to what the goal or objective should be. And then working with the community, going about to achieve that objective. So listening is the most important quality. And then second, a mobilization around the identified goal. I think that's the way you bring people together. And that's the way that you really infuse the community with the sense that collective action will bring about necessary change.
Thank you so much. So as we wrap up, one question around what can an organization like the National Alliance for Advancement of Haitian Professionals can do? That's an organization of really very diverse, really good, competent, active folks. What can they do to help address some of these inequities that all of you so eloquently, passionately speak about? What role can communities play, right? And kind of supporting, accompanying, and advancing the objectives of the Black Lives Matter movement. What can NAAHP do?
So I would love to point out that, with all of these upcoming elections, which, to piggyback on what the representative said, and I want you voting all the way down the ballot, right?
That's
Sometimes
right.
I know it is exhausting, right? And you just might want to check who you want to be president. But understand, as I said to you before, I promise you guys, who your DA is more important in some communities than who the president of the United States is, right? Are you going to be jammed up on smaller things, or is there going to be somebody who understands more situations that people might find themselves in? So that's number one. With your organization, I encourage you to ask for a forum, right? If there is a particular race that is happening, maybe, look, I went to South Carolina and I ended up interviewing Senator Elizabeth Warren. I was supposed to interview Senator Kamala Harris, and they said, oh, why don't you do Senator Warren because you're from Massachusetts? I could have interviewed the hopefully vice president of the United States to be soon. But that was a historically Black college and university that hosted that presidential debate where we had Senator Warren, Senator Harris, and several other Senator Sanders, several other people came. See whether you can host, even if it's a senatorial or a congressional forum, if it's happening in your area. If there are battleground states, ask. What I can tell you as a former, or I'm currently elected, but as a former candidate, we say yes to anything when we are running for office, right? So ask and make sure that you are recording. So you ask them specific questions about what impacts your community, just like other people do. So, positive things, as well as things where you are disparately impacted. Ask them what their cabinet might look like, whether they would commit to having individuals that are fluent in different languages or have lived experiences that are different. So I would ask you to do that as well. And then the thing I will end on is Black people, we are not a monolith, just like white people are not. So, I don't know whether you'd be encouraged to even have Republican candidates, or if you're, if you are not an organization that is involved in politics, or is an entity that would speak to Republicans and Democrats. I encourage you to realize that although we might not agree on everything, having different voices in different places with different experiences matters, right? So even if we don't agree on everything, we can still be supportive of each other, right? So again, those are the three things I would encourage. Bipartisan, right? That's what the word I was thinking about. Oh, wait, this is the commissioner of the Boston Police Department. I'm hoping there's not a homicide. I'm going to mute.
Sure. Please, Attorney General Racine.
I think I would associate myself with every word that DA Rollins noted. I would also add that, the NAHP is extraordinarily talented. And one other approach might be to assemble pockets of that talent. For example, we know in some of our communities, there's a lot of trauma If we could assemble the talent of psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, and others to actually come into the neighborhoods and provide some sort of relief from trauma, that would actually move the ball. So there are many ways for our rich, diverse, and extremely talented community to get out of the boardroom and into the street to help our community prosper.
I want to thank all of you. Truly, it's been truly a real pleasure to really serve as your moderator, and I learned so much. And I really hope that everybody who was listening learned as much I did, and hope that we can continue this conversation. And truly thank the NAAHP for putting together these forums, and for the media support, the media kind of a partner, Chacarella, for supporting this.
Thank you.
With that, I want to say a big thank you to you. And I don't know if the folks from NAAHP would like to say something. If not, I turn it over to you to say what's your last word for us this evening.
My last word for the NAAHP is that we've got to invite D.A. Rollins to be an honorary Haitian American.
I'm in. Who's making black rice? If someone's making black rice and pickles, I'm coming. Period. End of story.
Exactly.
Best food I've had in forever, and I eat every time I can at our wonderful Haitian restaurants. But I'm already in. I love this whole thing. All right, Karl. But really, what do you want to say to them? That's an easy yes.
Here, we have a great community. Oftentimes, we're all kind of stretched, right? But pick something in your community that needs improving, get some support around that, and move that ball down the road. Our community really needs our most talented people to step up and help it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I would just say, what I'm impressed as an outsider looking at this organization. Really lift up the exceptional people in your community that are doing great things. And obviously Karl is one of them, but there are so many people that if you can use your organization to highlight the teachers and the nurses and the individuals, not just the amazing attorney generals, right? But the individuals that you can just continue to educate, but have these type of important dialogues, right? Where you bring people from across the country together. I encourage you to be active and involved and recognize that your voice is so important to just, redouble down on what the representative said. If our vote didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying to shut down the post office. They wouldn't be trying to deport all of us. They wouldn't be trying to have immigration questions on the census. They are pulling out every trick to try to make it so we can't. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't do anything. Like, we are important. If we can band together and be strategic, we can change things immensely. So please, and invite me back. And then when we aren't in COVID, please have delicious food, because I will come.
Perfect. With that, I would say thank you so very much to all of you for making the time, for really taking the time out of what I know it's your very, very busy schedule to be with us this evening. And I want to thank all the folks from the background who really make this possible, from the NAAHP team for putting this together, and for all of us, for all of you who have joined us this evening. And I hope that this was beneficial to all of you, and that we will continue this discussion to address what is really a legacy of systemic inequities based on race that is endemic in all of our institutions. Thank you so much for the great work that you guys are doing. We'll continue to do, and stay safe and have a great evening. Thank you so much.